The winter winds howled across the fjords of Norrvalla, sweeping snow into drifts that piled against longhouses and blurred the boundaries between land and sky. Along the rocky shoreline, a lone figure moved with practiced stealth, shield strapped to her back and sword concealed beneath a heavy woolen cloak. Dagny Brynjolfsdottir kept her gaze fixed on the ground as she followed the narrow path toward the practice fields. Dawn had barely broken, and the village still slept, exactly as she had planned. These precious moments before the day truly began were the only times she could train without the mockery of others ringing in her ears. A shield maiden. The village elders had laughed when she'd first taken up arms at 16. With arms thin as kindling and a voice that barely rises above a whisper. 2 years had passed since then, and though her arms had grown stronger and her skill with blade and shield had improved, the ridicule had not ceased. If anything, it had grown worse. At gatherings, young warriors would imitate her careful, measured movements, exaggerating them into clumsy pantomime that left mead benches roaring with laughter. Women her age spoke of marriages and children, giving her pitying glances as they whispered behind cupped hands. Dagny reached the practice field and unstrapped her shield, a simple wooden circle reinforced with iron, painted with a falcon in flight. Her father had crafted it before the sickness took him, leaving her alone with her widowed mother in a society that valued strength above all else. "You bring shame to your father's memory," her uncle Torstein had told her just yesterday at the Thing assembly. "Skulking about with weapons when you should be seeking a husband." Dagny gripped her sword tighter, her knuckles whitening around the hilt. They didn't understand. Couldn't understand. In her dreams, she sailed on longships toward distant shores, fought alongside warriors whose names would be remembered in sagas. In her heart, she knew the gods had marked a different path for her than marriage to some local fisherman or farmer. But who would believe the quiet girl, the one who froze when too many eyes turned her way, could hear the call of battle in her blood? Dagny began her practice routine, moving through the forms her father had shown her before his death. Shield up, sword ready, feet positioned for balance. Each movement was a prayer to the gods, a whispered plea, "Make me strong enough to forge my own fate. Your stance is too wide." The deep voice cut through the morning stillness like an axe through ice. Dagny whirled, shield raised instinctively, to find herself facing a stranger. He stood tall at the edge of the field, his broad shoulders wrapped in a bearskin cloak, his red-gold beard neat but full. His eyes, the pale blue of winter sky, assessed her with an intensity that made her want to flee. "You compensate for your height by widening your stance," he continued, stepping forward. "It makes you slower to pivot." Dagny remained frozen, sword half-raised. No man in the village had ever offered her advice before, only mockery. She swallowed hard, finding her voice. "Who are you to criticize my form?" The words emerged stronger than she expected. A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Gunnar Sigurdsson of the Raven clan. Your Jarl's cousin, newly returned from the eastern lands." He gestured to her shield. "The falcon. A good choice for someone who watches from afar before striking." Dagny lowered her shield slightly, studying him. Everyone knew of Gunnar Sigurdsson, though he had been gone from these shores for 5 winters. Tales spoke of his ferocity in battle, of settlements conquered under his command, of his favor with Jarl Erik. "Why would a warlord concern himself with my stance?" she asked, suspicion edging her voice. "Because talent squandered is an offense to the gods," he replied simply. He drew his own sword, its hilt wrapped in leather darkened by years of use. "Now, let me show you." Before she could protest, he had positioned himself beside her, demonstrating the correction. "Like this. Narrower. Feel how much quicker you can turn." Dagny mimicked his stance, surprised at the difference. For the next hour, the renowned warrior guided her through forms and techniques she had never seen, offering corrections with a directness that bordered on harshness but contained no mockery. As the sun rose fully above the mountains, Gunnar finally sheathed his sword. "You have potential," he said, "but potential without proper training is like an unforged blade, useless." Dagny felt heat rise in her cheeks. The men of this village refuse to train with a woman. Then they are fools who will one day watch you surpass them. He turned to leave, then paused. "I will be here tomorrow at the same hour. Be ready for real training, Falkenshield." Before she could respond, he was striding away, leaving Dagny standing alone in the practice field, her heart pounding with something unfamiliar, hope. The great hall buzzed with activity that evening as the village gathered to feast with their returned kinsmen. Dagny sat in the shadows beside her mother, Hilda, picking at her food while trying to make herself invisible. Across the hall, Gunnar sat at the high table with Jarl Erik, laughing and sharing tales of his journeys. "He hasn't changed much," Hilda murmured, following her daughter's gaze. "Still handsome as ever, that one. Every unmarried woman in the village will be setting snares for him." "Mother," Dagny hissed, embarrassed. Hilda raised an eyebrow. "Don't tell me you weren't looking. I may be old, but I'm not blind. I was merely—" Dagny trailed off, unable to explain the morning's encounter. Her mother wouldn't understand. No one would believe that Gunnar Sigurdsson had deigned to train with the village oddity. The feast continued, with Gunnar eventually rising to tell tales of his victories in the eastern lands. His deep voice carried through the hall, painting vivid images of strange cities and fierce battles. Dagny found herself leaning forward, entranced by stories of a world beyond their fjord. "And now I return," Gunnar concluded, raising his drinking horn, "to claim my rightful lands and prepare for greater conquests come spring." Jarl Erik stood, clapping his kinsman on the shoulder. "And to find a wife, eh? A warlord needs sons to carry on his legacy." The hall erupted in laughter, and several fathers with marriageable daughters leaned forward eagerly. Dagny sank back into her seat, suddenly aware of how ridiculous her morning's encounter had been. A man like Gunnar would marry a woman of status and beauty, someone who would bring him powerful alliances, not some strange, quiet girl who preferred swords to spindles. "Perhaps I've already found someone worthy of consideration," Gunnar's voice cut through the noise, silencing the hall. Dagny kept her eyes fixed on her plate, not daring to look up as whispers erupted around her. She felt the weight of Astrid Thorvaldsdottir's smug gaze from across the hall. The Jarl's niece was surely the logical choice, with her golden hair and influential father. It wasn't until late in the evening, as the celebration grew rowdy with mead and boasting, that Dagny slipped away. Outside, the night air cleared her head as she walked toward the shoreline, seeking solitude. Running away again, Dagny shield fumbler. She stiffened at the familiar voice. Leif Otterson, the blacksmith's son, emerged from the shadows with two of his friends, all three swaying slightly from too much mead. "Leave me be, Leif," she said quietly, trying to step around him. He blocked her path. "I saw you watching Gunnar Sigurdsson all evening." As if a warlord would look twice at a mouse who thinks she's a wolf. His friend snickered behind him. "My gaze is my own business," Dagny replied, her hand instinctively moving toward the knife at her belt. Leif stepped closer, his breath hot and sour with mead. "Show us your shield work then, little maiden. Perhaps we need a demonstration of your great skill." One of his friends tossed him a broken barrel lid. "Here's a shield for the shield maiden." Dagny's cheeks burned with humiliation as Leif thrust the splintered wood toward her. "I have no quarrel with you," she said, her voice tight. "But we've had to endure your foolishness for years," Leif sneered. "Playing at being a warrior when everyone knows you're nothing but what?" The deep voice cut through the night like a blade. Gunnar stepped from the shadows, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. Leif stumbled back. "Lord Gunnar, we were just having some fun with 3 men against 1 woman?" A curious definition of fun. Gunnar's voice remained level, but something dangerous lurked beneath the calm. "Where I've been, such behavior would cost a man his honor. Perhaps his hand." The 3 young men sobered instantly. Leif bowed hastily. "No offense was meant, my lord." Yet offense was given. Gunnar stepped closer, towering over the blacksmith's son. "Apologize to Dagny Brynjolfsdottir." Leif's face contorted with surprise before he mumbled a grudging apology. At Gunnar's continued stare, his friends quickly did the same. "Now leave," Gunnar commanded. "And remember that how a warrior treats those he perceives as weaker reveals much about his character." The 3 slunk away, leaving Dagny standing rigid with embarrassment and anger, not just at her tormentors, but at needing rescue like some helpless maiden from a scald's tale. "I could have handled them," she said stiffly. Gunnar studied her. "I've no doubt. But why waste your strength on drunken fools when you'll need it for training tomorrow?" He gestured toward the path leading to the village. "I'll walk you home." "That isn't necessary." Dagny lifted her chin. "I've walked these paths alone since childhood." A faint smile touched his lips. "Then you'll indulge me. The night air clears my thoughts." They walked in silence for several minutes, Dagny acutely aware of his presence beside her. Finally, she gathered her courage. "Why did you help me this morning?" "With training." Gunnar was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. 5 years ago, before I left these shores, I saw a young girl practicing sword forms behind her father's house. Her technique was poor, but her determination was remarkable." He glanced at her. "I recognized you today, Dagny Brynjolfsdottir. You've improved, even without proper instruction." Dagny felt her chest tighten with unexpected emotion. Someone had seen her, truly seen her, all those years ago. "My father believed women should know how to defend themselves," she said softly. "He began teaching me before his death. After he was gone, I continued alone. Brynjolf the Far-sailed was a wise man. I sailed with him once, when I was younger than you are now." Gunnar's voice carried a note of respect. "He would be proud of your persistence." They reached the small longhouse where Dagny lived with her mother. Before she could thank him, Gunnar spoke again. "Tomorrow, bring your own shield. The training will be harder." With that, he nodded and turned back toward the village, leaving Dagny staring after him, wondering what fate the Norns were weaving for her in their mysterious loom. Through the bitter cold of midwinter, Dagny met Gunnar at the practice field each dawn. Under his tutelage, her skills sharpened rapidly. He was a demanding teacher, never satisfied with mere improvement, always pushing her toward perfection. Again, he would command after she completed a difficult sequence. Your shield arm dropped. An enemy would have gutted you. The village soon noticed their training sessions. Whispers followed Dagny through the settlement, some mocking, others suspicious, a few openly hostile. Why would the great Gunnar Sigurdsson waste his time with the strange, quiet daughter of Brynjolf? His making a mockery of her, Astrid Thorvaldsdottir declared loudly in the weaving house, her golden head bent close to her companion's. Playing with the shield maiden as a cat plays with a mouse before the kill. Dagny kept her eyes on her work, her fingers steady as they moved through the warp and weft despite the sting of Astrid's words. She had endured worse. "Perhaps he sees something in her that we don't," offered Jida, an older woman who had always been kind to Dagny. Astrid laughed, the sound sharp as breaking ice. "The only thing to see is a girl who doesn't know her place." My uncle says Gunnar is considering offers for marriage alliances. He needs a wife who will strengthen his position, not some oddity who thinks she's a warrior. That evening, troubled by Astrid's words, Dagny approached the shoreline where Gunnar stood watching the horizon, his form silhouetted against the fading light. You should choose another student, she said without preamble. People talk. Gunnar didn't turn. People always talk. It's what they do when they lack the courage to act. They say you're making a fool of me. That you're playing some game. Now he did turn, his expression serious. Do you believe that? Dagny hesitated, then shook her head. No. But I don't understand why you've chosen to train me. Because in 5 years of raiding, I've learned to recognize a warrior's heart regardless of the body that houses it. He gestured toward the sea. Come spring, I sail again. This time to the western lands, to establish a settlement that will bring wealth and glory to our people. And you need warriors, Dagny finished for him, understanding dawning. Gunnar nodded. Every sword arm I can trust. Including yours, if you're willing. The offer stole her breath. To sail as a shield maiden, to prove herself in battle, to see lands beyond the confines of their fjord, it was everything she had dreamed of since childhood. My mother, she began, thinking of Hilda alone, would be welcome in the settlement. We need healers as much as warriors. Gunnar's gaze was steady. Think on it. You have until the ice breaks to decide. As winter slowly relinquished its grip on the land, Dagny continued her training with renewed purpose. Under Gunnar's guidance, she learned to fight with axe and spear as well as sword, to move in formation with others, to understand the strategies of battle. Sometimes, when they paused to rest, he would tell her of the lands he'd seen, of the riches of Miklagard, of the Green Islands to the west, of peoples with strange customs and languages. In those moments, something shifted between them, a warmth that had nothing to do with the exertion of training. Dagny found herself noticing things she had not permitted herself to see before, the way the sun caught in his beard, turning it to fire, the rare smile that transformed his stern features, the gentleness of his hands when he corrected her grip on a weapon. Such thoughts were dangerous. A warlord like Gunnar would never see her as anything but a useful sword arm. And yet, sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher, something that made her heart beat faster than any training exercise. As the first signs of spring emerged, the village prepared for the equinox celebration, a night of feasting and ritual to honor the returning light. Dagny helped her mother prepare their contribution to the feast, bread shaped into sun wheels, a symbol of the turning season. You've changed this winter, Hilda observed as they worked the dough. There's a certainty in you now, a purpose. Dagny hesitated, then shared Gunnar's offer to join his expedition. He says you could come too, as a healer. Hilda's hand stilled. And what of Gunnar himself? Is he merely your teacher? Of course, Dagny replied too quickly, not meeting her mother's eyes. What else would he be? I see the way you look at him, daughter. And perhaps more importantly, I see the way he looks at you when he thinks no one notices. Dagny shook her head firmly. He's a warlord, mother. He'll make an advantageous marriage, probably to Astrid. I'm simply a shield maiden who will fight in his band. Hilda sighed. The heart rarely follows the path of advantage, Dagny. Remember that. The equinox celebration began at sunset, with the lighting of the great bonfire in the center of the village. Jarl Erik led the rituals, calling on Thor and Freya to bless the coming season with strength and fertility. Dagny stood with her mother, watching as offerings were cast into the flames. Across the fire, Gunnar stood with the Jarl's family, his profile strong in the flickering light. Beside him, Astrid Thorvaldsdottir leaned close, her hand resting on his arm as she whispered something that made him smile. Dagny looked away, reminding herself that what happened beyond the practice field was not her concern. She had a place in his war band, a chance to prove herself as a shield maiden. That should be enough. The rituals completed, the celebration turned to feasting and drinking. Skalds sang of heroes past and victories to come. Young couples slipped away to the shadows, seeking privacy for equinox blessings of their own. Dagny remained near her mother, avoiding the mocking glances of those who still thought her ambitions ridiculous. Shield maiden. She turned to find Gunnar standing behind her, a drinking horn in his hand. He offered it to her. Share a toast with me to spring and new beginnings. Dagny accepted the horn, taking a careful sip of the mead inside before returning it. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. The village says Jarl Erik will announce your betrothal tonight, she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Gunnar's eyebrows rose. Does he? That's news to me. To Astrid Thorvaldsdottir. It would be a strong alliance. Indeed it would. He studied her face. Would that concern you, Dagny Brynjolfsdottir? She kept her expression neutral. Only if it meant the end of my place in your war band. A smile touched his lips. Your place is secure, regardless of who I may or may not marry. He glanced toward the great hall, where people were gathering for more feasting. Walk with me instead. I find I've had enough of crowds for one evening. They walked away from the celebration, following a path that led toward the cliffs overlooking the fjord. Below, the dark water reflected the stars, a mirror image of the sky above. When I was a boy, Gunnar said as they stood at the cliff edge, I believed the stars were the campfires of our ancestors in Valhalla, watching over us. And now? Now I know they are guideposts for warriors brave enough to follow them to distant shores. He turned to her. That's what I saw in you from the beginning, Dagny. Someone brave enough to follow the stars, no matter what others might say. His words touched something deep within her, a recognition of the truth she had always known about herself but that no one else had ever seen. I decided to accept your offer, she said quietly. My mother will come as well. I'm glad. Gunnar stepped closer, his voice dropping lower. But I find I want to offer you more than just a place in my war band. Before she could respond, shouts erupted from the village behind them. They turned to see people running toward the shore, pointing at the horizon. Ships, someone cried. Ships approaching. Gunnar's expression hardened instantly. Raiders. Here, now. He grabbed Dagny's arm. Come. We need weapons. They raced back toward the village, all thoughts of personal matters forgotten in the face of danger. By the time they reached the shore, the approaching ships were clearly visible, 3 longships cutting through the dark water with deadly purpose. Who are they? Dagny asked, breathless from their run. Alfsson's men, Gunnar growled. Ragnar Alfsson. We have a blood feud that goes back generations. He must have learned of my return. Jarl Erik was already organizing the defense, calling for warriors to arm themselves. Women hurried children toward the forest, where they could hide if the village fell. Dagny. Her mother appeared, face tight with worry. Come, we must go with the others. No. Dagny stood firm. I've trained for this. I can fight. Hilda looked as though she would argue, then pressed her lips together and nodded. Then fight well, my daughter. The gods watch you tonight. Gunnar had already moved to join the Jarl, calling out orders to the gathering warriors. Dagny rushed to her home, donning her leather armor and strapping on her sword and shield. When she returned to the shore, the raiders' ships were closing the final distance. Dagny. Leif Otterson stared at her in disbelief. "What are you doing?" "Get back with the women and children." "I stay and fight," she replied calmly, taking her place in the defensive line. Other warriors muttered, some laughing despite the danger, others cursing her foolishness. But Gunnar, seeing her from his position near the Jarl, simply nodded in acknowledgement. His faith in her steadied her nerves as the first ship ground against the shore. The raiders poured from their ships with battle cries to Odin, axes and swords glinting in the moonlight. They were well armed and clearly experienced, moving with the coordination of men who had fought together many times. The defenders met them with equal ferocity, and soon the shoreline became a chaos of clashing weapons and shouted commands. Dagny found herself facing a burly raider whose beard was braided with small bones. He laughed when he saw her, clearly assuming she would be an easy kill. His laughter died when her first strike drew blood from his arm. Shocked, he attacked with renewed vigor, but Dagny had been well trained. She used her smaller size to her advantage, just as Gunnar had taught her, moving quickly to avoid the raider's powerful but slower blows. When he overextended on a thrust, she slipped inside his guard and drove her sword up through a gap in his armor. The man's eyes widened in disbelief as he fell. There was no time to process what she had done. Another raider took his place, and then another. Dagny fought with grim determination, her shield arm growing numb from the impact of blows, her sword arm burning with effort. Across the battlefield, she caught glimpses of Gunnar cutting through the raiders like a storm wind, his skill evident in every movement. He fought his way toward a tall figure who could only be Ragnar Alfsson himself, the leader of the raid. The two warlords clashed with terrible force, their duel becoming the center around which the battle seemed to turn. Warriors on both sides fought to reach them, either to aid their leader or to prevent others from interfering. Dagny struggled to make her way toward Gunnar, sensing the importance of the duel's outcome. As she fought, she heard the changing tide of battle around her, the raiders beginning to falter as the village defenders held firm. Then came a shout of triumph. Ragnar Alfsson had fallen, Gunnar's sword at his throat. The raiding party, seeing their leader defeated, began to retreat toward their ships. "Yield," Gunnar commanded Alfsson. "Yield and end this blood feud that has taken too many lives." "I yield," Alfsson gasped, blood streaming from a wound in his side. "The feud is ended." Victory cheers rose from the village warriors, but Dagny's relief was short-lived. As Gunnar stepped back from his defeated foe, one of Alfsson's men broke from the retreat, spear aimed at the warlord's unprotected back. "Gunnar!" Dagny screamed, running toward him. He turned at her warning, but too late to fully avoid the spear. It struck his shoulder rather than his heart, sending him staggering backward. Dagny reached the attacker before he could strike again, her shield smashing into his face with all the force of her fury. As he fell, she stood over him, sword ready. "Mercy," the man pleaded, seeing death in her eyes. For a heartbeat, she considered ending him where he lay. Then she remembered Gunnar's words about how a warrior treats a defeated foe. "Take your leader and go," she commanded, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet battlefield. "The blood feud is ended. Any who break the peace will answer to me." The raiders gathered their wounded, including Alfsson, and retreated to their ships. Dagny turned to find Gunnar watching her, pain evident in his features but pride in his eyes. "You fought well, shield maiden," he said, grimacing as he pulled the spear from his shoulder. "As did you, warlord," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Around them, the villagers stared in disbelief. The strange, quiet girl they had mocked for years had fought like a Valkyrie and commanded enemy warriors with the authority of a Jarl. Hilda appeared, already gathering herbs for healing. "Bring him to our house," she directed the men supporting Gunnar. I'll tend his wound." As they made their way from the battlefield, Dagny became aware of the change in how people looked at her, not with mockery or pity, but with newfound respect. She had proven herself in the way their people valued most, through courage in battle. In her mother's house, Gunnar submitted to Hilda's ministrations, wincing as she cleaned and bound his wound. "You'll live," Hilda pronounced when she finished. "Though you'll carry another scar to add to your collection." "Scars are a warrior's history written on the flesh," Gunnar replied, his eyes finding Dagny's across the room. "They remind us of the moments that shaped us." Later, when Hilda had gone to help with other wounded, Dagny sat beside Gunnar's bed. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "You gave me the skills to do so," she answered. "We're even." Gunnar reached for her hand, his fingers wrapping around hers with surprising gentleness. "Before we were interrupted earlier, I was about to tell you something important." Dagny's heart quickened. "About my place in your war band. About your place in my life." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "The Jarl indeed spoke of marriage tonight, but not to Astrid. He suggested I take a wife before sailing west, someone to help build the new settlement." "And what did you say?" "I told him I had already chosen, if she would have me." Gunnar's grip tightened slightly. "Dagny Brynjolfsdottir, I've watched you transform from a girl with a dream into a warrior worthy of the sagas. I want you not behind me or beside me, but as my equal, my shield wife, my partner in all things." Dagny stared at him, scarcely able to believe what she was hearing. "The village will say you could do better. That you need a Jarl's daughter, not a shield maiden. The village has already been proven wrong about you once tonight," he pointed out with a smile. "Let them be proven wrong again." In his eyes, she saw the truth, that he valued her precisely because of who she was, not despite it. The quiet girl who had dreamed of more, the stubborn woman who had forged herself into a warrior through sheer determination. "Yes," she said simply, her voice steady with certainty. "I will be your shield wife, Gunnar Sigurdsson." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He pulled her closer, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that promised both tenderness and passion, the meeting of equals bound by respect as much as desire. The village of Norrvalla had never seen a wedding like theirs. It was held at the edge of spring, with the first flowers pushing through the last patches of snow. Dagny stood before the assembled people not in a traditional bride's attire, but in finely crafted leather armor, her sword at her hip and her falcon shield on her arm. Gunnar faced her similarly armed, his red-gold beard freshly trimmed, his eyes shining with pride as the priestess bound their hands together with a cord of braided red and white. "As this cord binds your hands, so are your lives now bound," the priestess intoned. Two warriors joined in purpose, equal in honor, united in fate. They exchanged rings of gold and spoke the ancient vows, promising to stand together through battle and peace, plenty and hardship, joy and sorrow, until they met again in the halls of Valhalla. When Gunnar kissed his bride before the assembled village, a cheer rose that echoed across the fjord. Even those who had once mocked Dagny now raised their drinking horns in tribute to the shield maiden who had proven her worth. Astrid Thorvaldsdottir, her dreams of becoming Gunnar's bride shattered, watched from the edge of the crowd with bitter eyes. But when Dagny caught her gaze, she offered no triumph or gloating, only a warrior's nod of acknowledgement. They would never be friends, but they could respect each other's strength. The celebration lasted well into the night, with feasting and drinking, song and dance. Tales were told of the battle against Alfsson's raiders, and of how the shy shield maiden had saved the warlord's life. Already, the skalds were crafting verses that would one day become part of the settlement's history. As the festivities continued, Dagny and Gunnar slipped away to the cliffs where they had stood on the night of the raid. Below them, the fjord waters reflected the stars, and in the distance, Gunnar's ships waited at anchor, ready for the journey west. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Of the journey?" "No." Dagny leaned into him, her head against his chest. "Of failing those who will depend on us in the new settlement." "A little." "That fear will make you a better leader," he assured her. "It reminds us that our decisions affect others." She turned in his embrace to face him. "I never thought I would find someone who saw me, truly saw me, for who I am. And I never thought I would find a woman whose strength matched my own," he replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "The gods wove our fates together long before we knew it, Dagny Sigurdsson." She smiled at her new name, at the future it represented. "Then let us honor their weaving and make it something worthy of the sagas." Gunnar's kiss was his answer, a promise sealed beneath the watching stars. 3 days later, with the morning sun glinting on calm waters, they set sail for the western lands. Dagny stood at the prow of the lead ship, her falcon shield gleaming, her husband beside her and her mother safely aboard with her healing herbs. Behind them, the villagers of Norrvalla watched from the shore as their ships grew smaller against the horizon. Some shook their heads at the strangeness of it all, a shield maiden sailing as the equal of a warlord. Others wondered if perhaps there was more strength in Dagny Brynjolfsdottir than they had ever given her credit for. And far ahead, beyond the reach of sight but clear in Dagny's heart, lay the new beginning they would forge together, a settlement where a woman's worth would be measured by her courage and character, not by her conformity to tradition. Where the quiet ones, the different ones, might find their own paths to greatness. As the wind filled the striped sail above them, Dagny felt the last of her old fears fall away. She had found her place in the world, not by changing who she was, but by becoming more fully herself. And in Gunnar's eyes, she saw not just love, but something even more precious, recognition of her true nature, acceptance of her warrior's heart. Together, they sailed toward the future, two spirits bound as one, following the stars to distant shores and adventures yet untold.